Let's date forever. Here's your weekly dose of relationship fuel with Sammy and Nathan Yeager. Hello and welcome to Date Forever. In this week's episode, we're chatting about critically looking at yourself and unpacking your behaviours, the 8 flavours of attention, and avoiding attention-seeking behaviours in a relationship. But before we dive into that, Sammy, what's been fueling you up this week?
I had such a good weekend. Yeah. I was reunited with one of my girlfriends who I said goodbye to in London in 2019. And we weren't totally sure when we were going to see each other again, but I definitely did not think it was going to be over 3 years later. But we were reunited over the weekend and we hung out and ate, drank, danced, just enjoyed each other's company. So that really, really fueled me up. It was so nice to be in each other's company again and also just be running a bit of a muck.
Yeah, have fun.
Yeah. What about you, Nath? What fueled you up this last week?
Mine was finishing one of my projects. So I recently bought a secondhand bike and had spent the last few weeks pulling it apart and rebuilding it. And yeah, really happy with the outcome. It was just really nice to see it come to fruition and then get it on the trails and give it a first test run.
Speaking of bikes, just to hijack your fuel up,
yeah.
My other fuel up was that I am very, very close to my first triathlon.
Going through the last of everything before you...
Yes. So
training,
all of that. But that's definitely been fueling me up.
Yeah.
Being very intentional about my training and the way that I'm using and moving my body.
Yeah, amazing. But now here's this week's guests.
Today we have Melissa and Iain joining us. Melissa is a relationship and life coach, founder and creator of Gumball Love, of the Level Up for Love Academy and Back to You Academy. Iain is the husband, dog dad, co-creator of the Gumball Love Assessment, and expert brainstormer and perfect partner. Welcome to the show, you two.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Before we even started this interview off air, you shared a little snippet about your relationship, which I'm really curious about. So tell us, you're recently married, right?
Yes, we just got married July 30th. So we're fresh back from our honeymoon. So we have a little bit of a complicated story because we met in New York City in 2014. And I had my lightning strike moment and felt like I had met my unicorn. And I was really embarrassed that it was like, I would always make fun of the movies. Like, these things really don't happen. We have to get our heads out of the clouds. This is all fantasy, which can be true. But when I met him and our eyes met, it was just this very euphoric experience. And then Iain makes fun of me because my pupils fully dilated. So I had black eyes. I looked maybe a little bit possessed. And I just remember telling him
that are like narcotic mushrooms or something. Is she eating
having a good time or having a real bad time?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So luckily I was able to maintain composure, and he's so smart that everything he was talking about, I was like, oh my God, I have no idea what to say because I feel like a complete weirdo and I feel like I'm floating around on the ceiling somewhere. And then finally we realized we both like the show Scandal. And I was like, I can talk about this. This is a subject I know. And so we kind of bonded over our love for the show Scandal. And then, so the date went really well, but it was not the right timing. Iain was about to leave New York. And so we went on a couple more dates and it always felt unfinished to me. I felt like something so strong. And
as did I, but
yes.
I was kind of in a weird place in my life, both personally and with my family. My father had just gotten sick in October 17th of 2014. He'd had a stroke. He was living in Bermuda. I was just sort of personally kind of a mess, even though I came across probably a little bit more polished when Melissa saw me and was not hallucinating, but by basically April of 2015, I was out of the country. I'd gone back to Bermuda, and then I kind of did a little bit of a world tour, Bermuda, UK, and Canada for basically up until early December of 2020, when I'm not a US citizen. So I had to wait for my immigration stuff to come through to be able to re-enter the United States. And then I drove straight from there to Nebraska, and we just moved right in, having met and dated several times, but doing a lot of long distance on the phone and texting like all the time in that previous kind of 8 or 9 months, getting to know each other really, really well in a different framework. And it was a real huge leap of faith, I think, but it worked out amazing. Well,
because we only had like basically 3 dates of like late 2014 into 2015. And then we didn't see each other for 5 years. And so when we reconnected beginning of 2020, it was like, I got this text from him. I was like, oh my gosh, Iain Roberts is texting me. And I knew I was weak for him. So I was like, oh my God, do I respond to this? Am I going to make myself vulnerable again? But I say that story because I was a completely different person in 2014, 2015. I had just gotten to New York, and I really I launched Gumball Love, but it was still in its beginning stages. And I was just getting clients, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in New York City. And I know that's one of your goals, to live in New York City, right? For a little bit. So
I'd like to do a season. I reckon 3 months would be great.
Yes. And you'll probably get addicted because it's such a great city. And so I was still like, and I think Iain was my first date in New York. So I was like, oh my gosh, and he's 6'7". I'm almost 5'10". So to make this, I called him the unicorn because I actually put in Match.com when I first got to New York. I was like, I'm in New York City. I should be able to find anyone I want. So I literally just put ridiculous criteria. Like when you're looking for an apartment in New York, for example, and you're like in unit, washer, dryer, and view of the city, and this, and you're like, maybe it exists. I was doing that online dating. I was like, what if somebody's out there? And there were like 6 guys that showed up, and Iain was one of them. And I was like, he was the only one that I thought was cute. So I think I just winked at him or whatever. I think it was a wink on Match.com. Then he messaged me and we went on that date. But then after we were separated, that's when I really did my own journey of really figuring out who I was. And I think had we been together at that point, I would have made him into this pedestal guy. And when we reconnected in 2020, I was kind of like, all right, Roberts, what do you got? I was kind of like, my standards were really secured. I knew what I was looking for. I knew what I needed, which we talk a lot as coaches about. What do you want? What do you need? You need to really figure that out in your relationship. You need to have your own life, your own interests and your goals. So I've been loving your guys' podcasts about really knowing how to fuel yourself in all those areas so that you're not completely depleted and trying to find your happiness in that other person. And so I think that's probably where I was when I met him. It was like googly eyes and, oh my gosh, he's the everything. And when we reconnected, I was able to have like real conversation, connect with him like a human being, not a weirdo girl with black eyes, but like I challenged him on certain questions. We talked politics, we talked religion, we talked everything, all the taboo subjects. And we realized we synced up on our values. So when he was in Canada and I was in New York, the border closed. All we could do was text and talk on the phone. And so by the end of the year, it was like, okay, I guess you can't just come visit because he wouldn't have been able to go back. So he had to just come here permanently. So we just decided, okay, we're just going to move in together and figure this out. And so, I was like, literally, we reconnected for the first time in 6 years in our living room, right in this house. So That's like the craziest part of the story, but clearly it works and we got married.
Yeah. And we just got back from our honeymoon at the exact spot where I was in Canada, a family property up on the lake up there. And we did, it ended up being about almost 2 months of a honeymoon, but like kind of how things come full circle, quite ironic, I think. But, when I had originally met Melissa in 2014, she had said to me after the fact, like in 2020, she's like, the one thing you said to me that was very surprising when I told you I was coaching girls in relationships, I had said to her how wonderful that was. And I really, I felt that. And she was like, most guys are like, "Oh, what are you doing? You trying to analyze me? What is it? What's your angle here? Am I part of some kind of case study, or, am I a subject of an experiment?"
And you were
How
like,
to lose a guy in 10 days.
Yes. And he was like, "Oh, you're helping women." And I was like, "Oh my God, somebody that hears what I'm actually doing. It's not about analyze." Because I didn't really want those worlds to collide. Yes, I'm a relationship coach and I help women avoid bad guys, but I didn't want the person I'm dating to feel that way or see my work in that way. So that was always a struggle in my mind. I was like, am I going to be this relationship coach that's never in a relationship? But I really believed you need to find yourself and be happy in who you are, and the right person will come along. And I believed that 100%. I kept having faith. I coached clients and they would get married before me, which was kind of annoying. I was like, when is it my turn? But yeah, Iain just totally got it immediately. And he was the only guy that ever said that to me.
But the most interesting part to me from I've lived in a lot of places. When I was growing up, I wasn't in any school for more than basically 3 years. So I was always kind of like rotating through, having to make different groups of friends and establish different kind of life in a different place, different countries sometimes and whatnot. But I've always been pretty introspective about myself and my own flaws and whatnot. But having understood that Melissa was doing coaching, and that was great. But really, it wasn't until I got here to Omaha in December of 2020, and then the months after that I really understood what exactly she was doing. And I was like, wow, this isn't just like relationship coaching. This is like human behavior analysis and like being able to kind of predict behavior. And from the framework that she had pretty much mostly together, but through the way she introduced it to me and how we kind of brainstormed and walked through it, she really was able to boil down the essence of an attention-seeking relationship with, whether it's a friend, family, specifically romantic, and put them into categories and associated behaviors. And I was like, oh my God, like I now see this in everybody, my friends, family, even in myself. Back in 2014, when we first met, I had a lot of work to do on myself still. And I saw some of those behaviors in what I was doing. And I'm like, oh my God, like, was it that easy? But a journey that you have to kind of go on yourself, because a lot of people are not kind of prepared to critically look at themselves and say, wow, like, why am I behaving in this way? And why am I treating people in this particular way? Somebody maybe I really care about, but I'm not treating them well. And it's like, yeah, you're doing these types of behaviors, and there's a lot of underlying reasons why.
I want to get into this, and I want to understand this framework that you've developed, because it sounds like it's amazing and that it's really helped you and a lot of your clients. But I want to go back to something that you said, Iain, about the timing of when you first met. You said it was the wrong timing. And I think sometimes we experience that in life, where it's like, it feels like the wrong timing in the moment. But when you zoom out and it's like, no, that was actually the perfect timing. I had this experience, and then it allowed you both to go and get to know yourself better and develop your own relationship with yourself and what you really wanted. And then that opportunity to come back together like 5+ years later as almost a different shape of the person that you were when you first met. But I'm really curious. So, Iain, when you reached out and you sent the little cheeky text, and you were like, oh, I hope she's still got the feels. Like, I know I've still got the feelings. Like, did you know that it was just going to be on when you reconnected, or?
I honestly did not. It was more of having known her, like, even in the 3 times that we were out and spent time together. I think I got to know her pretty well. And she was always somebody who I felt was just, apart from, physical attraction, chemistry, she was just a mind and a soul of just a wonderful person. And for the 5+ years, she was somebody I couldn't get out of my head.
An open loop.
Basically, yes. But knew in those times, it wouldn't have been right for me to reach out to her and I wouldn't say playing games, but just trying to re-engage when I wasn't in a place that was healthy enough for me to be able to be the kind of guy and partner that she would need me to be, and that I would want to be for her.
Yeah. I've observed that a little bit in some of my girlfriends who are single, are still looking for the person that they want to do life with long term. And those past relationships that they've had where that person is very actively trying to keep them on the bench. Like they'll just throw out the random connection every now and then, just frequently enough that they stay on the hook. And I think like, I just want to applaud you for like knowing that that wasn't the right thing to do. Like to go, I only want to reach out when I'm available for what I really want this relationship to be. Because I think, often there's all that chatter and noise about past relationships or opportunities that didn't come to fruition the way that you wanted to. But I'm really curious. You reached out, you got the text, you reconnected, and then you were not able to be in each other's physical presence. So you did this long distance thing for the first part of like iteration 2 of your relationship. How do you think that shaped how you've built the foundation of what is now a marriage?
I know for sure this is so embarrassing, but I still had anxious attachment and fears of, I always tell my clients, you can do all the therapy, but when you meet the person that makes you feel the most vulnerable and you have all the feels for, then it puts everything you've learned to the test. And I felt so tested during that time because we had all the feelings, but I couldn't physically see him. And every month they would say, maybe next month on the 21st. It was always the 21st of the month. And then it would only extend 30 days though. Little did we know it would be over 2 years. And so, it was just,
what was it? 14 days to slow the spread.
Right. So I think it was for me, he was so consistent. Every single day, I always heard from him, and he was such a caregiver to me, even though he wasn't there physically. Being in New York was like so scary. I mean, it was just terrifying in those beginning times. And he would send me articles and let me know what was going on and keep me posted and just kind of talk me off the ledge all the time, because it was just like, oh my gosh, I'm getting in the elevator and my neighbors that I've known for 5 years or 6 years are now scared of me and they won't even talk. It was just like people were going up to the elevator edge, like, no, come in. It's like, oh my God, what do I do? I'm taking the stairs 8-9 flights up. And it was just really difficult. So he was consistent. And that's the one thing that I would get nervous. I would have all that anxiety. Like, what if he's talking to somebody else, which now that I've gone to Canada where he was, there's like nobody it's the middle of nowhere.
No chicks except for those with no teeth.
Yeah, not quite like your selection of New York where you could put in all your filters.
Right.
There was no one to start with.
The ideas I would have in my head, and then I think back and I'm like, oh my gosh, he was in the middle of nowhere in Canada during a pandemic near his father, who was elderly and did not need any foreign germs in the house. Like, there's no way he would have been doing anything, but I could create stories in my head, and I had to deal with my own issues, realizing that he was doing nothing. I would journal. Do you have any evidence to prove that there's anything going on? And I didn't have any evidence. And that would I would drive myself nuts. And I would go to my therapist and I would try to like sell my therapist on it. And he'd just say, he goes, I think you need to see this one through. I was like, really? I would get him all convinced, like, you know what? I
love how textbook anxious attachment style all of those behaviors that you just described are. So if anyone's listening and they're not familiar with attachment theory and you don't know your own attachment style, like, get curious about it. There's a few really great books that you can read. But the general premise is that there's a secure attachment, an avoidant attachment, an anxious attachment, or an anxious avoidant. And somewhere in the middle there, you've developed a series of pattern of behavior in how you approach your relationships. And so much of what Melissa has just shared around those anxious behaviors is like very, very common for that attachment style. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for having the awareness to even acknowledge like that you were journaling about it, you were seeing a therapist about it, you are in the space and you still succumb to those kind of thoughts and loops, like, because you're human.
Yes. And my goal was to not take that to Iain and have him be the one that had to get me through it. Sometimes I did though. Like sometimes I would literally get myself crazy and he would say, babe, you're making things up out of nothing. You're like creating this out of nowhere. And I would just feel like, oh God. And if you were like if I was PMSing, it was work. It was like, oh no, I've for sure got this right. There's no way.
Tap into a whole nother level during those few days.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but I think overall, to your question, it just allowed us to connect on such a deeper level. Not having, we never video chatted. We never did. Like, we knew we were attracted to each other, and we knew like that part was like all good, but we were never in a position where we could act on some of those sort of
Zoom sex, no
lustful feelings, so to speak. But it just, we're able to get to know each other in such a deeper way that it was really just the foundation for where we are today. And there are some things we do disagree on, but for the most part, we're like very synced up in values and beliefs and direction in life and what we're looking for and how we want to be able to kind of meld together and share that going forward. We kind of really discovered all that over the phone, really. And so when I moved here in December of 2020, it didn't feel weird at all. I was a little nervous, like driving 100 miles an hour and a 17-hour journey to get here, but with a packed up SUV. But I was just like, am I really doing this? But it didn't really feel all that. It didn't feel awkward at all. And it really didn't feel all that scary, which was kind of surprising. But,
So, Melissa, I want to shift gears a little bit and hear a little bit about your story to becoming a relationship and life coach, and then this fantastic framework that you've developed. So how did you become a coach, or why did you decide to become a coach?
So I think it first started with the concept of gumball love, which I never thought I would be talking about gumballs in my adult life. But it started with a flippant remark where someone said, every time he puts in a quarter, you give him a gumball, stop giving him gumballs. And I just remember hearing that going, every time he puts in a quarter, you give him a gumball. And it was referencing a girl, she was going through a divorce. It was a divorce lawyer that actually said it. She was going through a divorce and her ex-husband, or soon to be ex, was texting her and they were fighting over text. And it was interrupting the meeting with the lawyer, and the lawyer was getting irritated. So he said to her, every time he puts in a quarter, you give him a gumball, stop giving him gumballs. And I started thinking about the gumball. It's a sugar high. So that concept just sat with me for a while, and I just couldn't stop thinking about it. In that case, that particular guy, he was trying to get attention, which is now what I associate with the gumball. So gumball love is attention addiction, or there's some people that want attention and some people that want connection. And everybody's on a spectrum, right? So we all love attention. We all like to get attention. It's a normal thing. There's a functional level of attention that makes us all whole. We have to have it when we're children. That's what gives us secure attachment, right? We get the proper amount of attention from parents, so we become securely attached. But when we have any kind of trauma or something disrupts in our development and we don't get the right amount of attention, then we can become excessive attention seekers or desperate attention seekers. I came up with this. It's kind of a weird combination. I was dating the wrong guy over and over again, and I had everything else in my life was great. Career was always good. Friends. I always had everything else. Everybody thought you're so put together. I always have my nails done and my hair done. Everybody just thought it was all perfect. But then I would be dating these guys that I would have been embarrassed to bring to any kind of an event. Like the guys that I was talking to online or ended up going out with, it was like, they didn't look like my life. And I didn't understand, why am I attracting this kind of a guy? Or why does he look like a great guy and then end up being someone who pulls away, someone who cheats, someone who all of a sudden he's like a different person where I thought we had a connection and now he's ghosting. All of the things that we experience, I was experiencing all of those 10 years ago, and it was driving me crazy. And every book I read, it was like, okay, yes, but he's just not that into you. At first it felt like, yes, he's just not that into you. It makes so much sense. But then it was like, what about when he acts into you and then he's not, and then he is again? Like, what does that mean? And every book was like a little bit of what I was looking for. But then I always felt like I was playing games or it was what men want. And it would drive me crazy. Like one man can't speak for all men. One woman can't speak for all women. So these guys that are like, here, let me tell you what men want. It was always so tunnel vision into one perspective. And so that drove me crazy. And finally, I realized there were two types. I was attracting the ones that wanted attention, and that attention seeking behavior, it was always intense. It was always exciting. But then they would pull away because they weren't experiencing building connection, building a foundation. They were getting high versus getting connected. And that differentiator changed everything. All of a sudden, I could be at work. I could be on a date. I could see it with my boss, my coworkers. I could see it with friends. Oh, this person just wants attention. They don't really want to talk to me. They're not really interested in me. And so making that differentiator was so critical. And it allowed me to filter out all of these guys I would have typically gone on dates with, or tried to figure out their problems or their past, or try to figure out what's going on with them. You know, we invest so much because we like the potential. We're so fixated on chemistry. We just get blinded by all of that. And we can't see how do they want attention. So the framework that Iain was speaking of is attention is a broad term. And it drove me crazy because the gumball machine is full of these colors, right? There's 8 colors in the gumball machine. And we literally narrowed it to 8 flavors of attention.
Yeah, wow.
So now what I take my clients through is, this is your red flag ultimate tester. If you want to know, am I in the relationship with the wrong person, or am I getting tempted by somebody who looks great and sounds great, but they are attention seeking, and eventually the flavor will run out, they will get bored, and you will feel like something's wrong with you and then you'll try to fix it versus realizing, oh, they just got bored. The attention, I'm not able to get them high anymore. And that's what they're seeking. And some people are just seeking that high over and over again. They're on the Tinder apps, where they're just like the hookup apps, those types of people. Although some people can meet on Tinder. I know I just heard one of your guests say met on Tinder. It happens. I've met people that have gotten married off of Tinder. So it does happen. Yeah. But typically it's people they want the quick fix. And if they want the quick fix, there's a whole 10 podcasts behind what they want and why they want it and why they're seeking that. But it's very difficult to detect unless you know what you're looking for.
Okay, run us through the 8 flavors. What are they?
Okay, so it's the red gumball is Arouse Me. So that's about sex. So obviously sex can be healthy with a couple, but if the person I call them the leg humpers. If they show up, the guy that shows up wants to hook up like right away, or he's like, send me a pic. He's an Arouse Me gumball guy. He's like, give me the red gumball. I don't care what you do for a living. I just want to see your boobs. Like that's Arouse Me gumball guy. So before I say these though, nobody is just one. So I have an assessment that Iain helped me put together, and we labored over it for months.
Yeah.
I mean, it was intense because we were really like, what makes Arouse Me? How does Arouse Me show up? What are the different ways? It's not just sending dick pics. It's all kinds of different nuances that really show this guy's just wanting you to, or girl, they just want to get aroused. They're just looking for sex. That's their high. That's their thing. And so, but they can be very charismatic in the process. I always have a joke. It's easy when it's George Costanza. You can get rid of the George Costanza Arouse Me guy. But when he looks like
Magic Mike,
Robert Pattinson, or,
you can tell my flavor.
Magic Mike.
Yeah. When it's who your favorite guy, then it's really hard to resist. So that's number one. The number 2 is the orange gumball, and that's Fight Me. So those are the drama people. The guy that's always drama. Everything's about a fight, which people think is passion. People think is like, oh, we have all this passion. I know we fight all the time, but it's our chemistry, and that's why we fight. The yellow is Entertain Me. And Entertain Me is the person that's never happy. It's too cold. It's too hot. The service isn't good enough. You feel like you can't be in a room alone with them because if you're reading something, they have to constantly bug you. That's the Entertain Me. Like I call them the fussy baby.
They want to text all day back and forth. And it's like, I'm not here. Would you want me to start juggling for you? Like, what's the next thing that's going to satisfy you? Because they're never satisfied until you stop responding. And then, they either blow you up or they go on to somebody else and do the same thing.
And Iain made a great observation that a lot of these flavors escalate to fight me.
Yeah.
So if the
like
fuss,
the final boss from the video game is fight me, because that's the one where it's gone so far, and typically maybe you haven't given, using a guy in this scenario, if the girl hasn't given the guy the appropriate gumballs that he's looking for, he gets so like bent out of shape, and he's not getting the fix that he needs from the regular, I call them regular, but the other flavors of attention, that he's got to escalate it up to fight me, which, if from a brain chemistry standpoint, I'll let Melissa speak to that.
So fight me, I wish I could put as like a huge gumball, because dopamine can satisfy an attention seeker for a period of time, but someone who escalates to extremes like fighting on a consistent basis, they actually need endorphins and adrenaline to calm them down. So at first it looks like they want to fight, but all of my clients, I'll ask them, if you have a fight me gumball guy, let me ask you, after the fight, does he appear calm? And they're like, yeah, because they need that. So it's a pattern probably from childhood. All this stuff usually comes from childhood, where they've developed a pattern where it has to escalate to that extreme, because they don't have the ability to absorb the serotonin in the brain and the hypothalamus. So they cannot calm themselves down unless they push it to those extremes, where the pituitary gland then releases the endorphins, and that is what calms them. So it's a weird cycle that we get caught in. And so when you're with a fight me person, or the entertain me flavor can be like the person like, hello, are you there? And you just had a call at work or something. They were texting and now they're annoyed. And if you don't handle it properly, then you're in a fight. So it can go from like, entertain me. If you don't entertain me, now I'm going to fight you. So red, orange, yellow, green is compete for me. So green with envy, I would try to make them as color coordinated as I could. But compete is where there's always somebody else in the picture that you feel like you're competing with, whether it's an ex-wife or an ex-husband, or you feel like it's somebody at work they're always talking about, or they could just be the person that talks about the waiter or the waitress, or it's like they're always creating a triangle in some aspect that you feel like you're competing with. So that can even go into if you're dating somebody who is married, or if you find out that they're married and now you're like, okay, I didn't know you were married, or I didn't know you were separated, and you're not really sleeping in the same bed. You're in the basement kind of a thing. That's a very
just highlighted a very clear pattern of one of my friends, and they're probably going to listen to this and hear this for themselves, but they always end up with the person who is the green, that they want to be with the person who's like, compete for me. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Maybe.
Okay. Yeah. I've never looked at it like that. But they gravitate towards green gumball people.
Yes.
Okay. And when time is right, we could get you the assessment to send to your friend, and they're not labeled at the top that this is the flavor. But once you go through and you look at he does this and he makes you feel like this, and then you get to the end and you're like, and you see the results, and it blows people away, because they're like, oh my God, this is the pattern that I've been dealing with all these guys.
Yes. Yes.
That's number 4, right?
That's number 4. Yes, that's green. So blue is the pity me person. And I just want to keep disclaiming that you can have a pity me, entertain, like some people can have a entertain me, fight me, pity me person. So when people take our assessment, each flavor will show up with a percentage, so they can see like the behaviors are that they lead with this, but they follow with these 3, or these are their primary areas of attention that they're seeking. And once you know them, you're like, they look completely different to you, because you're like, oh my God, there's that pity me thing coming through. So the pity me person it's the person with the sad story. Everything's about them. And it's like, you tell them something about you and they're like, well, you think that's bad, listen to this. And then they've got an even sadder story. It's like the person who never wants a solution. They always want to just focus on the problem.
Always want a problem. not a
yeah. And they're always trying to make you feel guilty, you know, for your role, which is no role, but, you know, like, oh, you know, look at me. And
you had a bad day, but my day was worse.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or I have 10,000 problems for that solution.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Or it's a lot of the people pleasers will fall for a pity me because they want to help. They're great caregivers. So a lot of these amazing women or men that are falling for these kinds of people are often really good partners, but they just get confused about this is going too far. This is them always taking from you, and they're never the giver. They're always the receiver. And sometimes they appreciate you. Like that's a lot of times what you're looking for is just to be appreciated. But eventually it becomes when they're getting high off of people, oh, I'm so sorry. And, you know, that's really terrible. It goes on and on. So pity me can be very powerful. So that's the blue. And then purple, Ian's favorite, is Idolise me. So Idolise me is the one that maybe he struggled with a little bit because this is a very good, he's, you know, the life of the party. And
thank God I'm not the Arouse me guy. Fucking horrible people. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So it's the center of attention guy. He is, I thought about calling him the rock star or the celebrity type, like, and I use celebrity loosely. It's like the guy that was like really good at football like 100 years ago and he's still talking about it. He can be Ian's like, you can be a loser, idolize me, where you're really not cool, but you want people to
I'm sure we've all met those people who are still talking about that one achievement that they are super freaking proud of that has no relevance to their current life.
Story on repeat.
Yeah. Okay. And I just want to check a couple of times in this framework, you've spoken specifically about men, but I'm assuming that this does apply to all genders, all people.
Yes.
Or is it really a framework for understanding men?
No, it's really for all people. I just coach mainly women that are dealing with men. But
I need like a little asterisk to be like, although we're talking about how this applies to men, all people have gumballs.
Yeah, it's like a human behavior, human relationship framework that works for members of family, friends, same sex, different sex, whatever. It's all kind of the same behavior pattern.
And actually, the assessment we created, I have now created a non-romantic piece because once you start to see, okay, this is the type of person I'm attracting, these are the flavors of attention that they kind of lead with, then it's really interesting to look at your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, your best friend, your boss, whatever. Like, what is it that's bugging me? Because I will admit, even as the creator of this, I still struggle to see it in people that are close to me. I don't want to see it. And then once you see it, it's really powerful because then you're like, oh, it's so gross. Like, I don't want that to be who they are. And that's like the hardest part about this is once you see it, it becomes glaringly obvious. However, when you're on dating apps and you want to take out all that guesswork and you're so sick of the guy that's like, hi, hey, how are you? Good morning. How was your day? Show me your boobs, like all that stuff. Like you don't have to decode this anymore.
Yeah.
That you will be able to.
Red gumball.
Yes. Red gumball or, oh, this
yellow
guy's
gumball. Entertain me.
Yes. Yeah. Entertain me. Yes, exactly. So Idolise me though. That's a good example is the guy that kind of leaves you in the room and he goes and talks to everybody else. If he's getting attention from other people, he'll for sure ignore you for the whole party or a lot of it, unless you can elevate his status in some way. So if you imagine an Idolise me real life celebrity where you can see all those examples where they literally will trash their whole relationship because they're in the spotlight and they can't let go of it. So I know someone who's the drum technician for a world famous singer. I can't say the name because it'll reveal his identity, but he said everybody leaves that stage and goes and gets high. And I said, why? And he said, because once that crowd, they play for 50,000 plus people. Once the crowd silence is silent, they can't handle it. They can't handle it. They're not being adored. So Idolise me is a lot about adore me and tell me I'm great and give me compliments. So it can be, Idolise me is pretty broad, but it's center of attention is where, you just want to so when people are bragging about themselves, he and I will be like, idolize me, or we'll be texting it to each other like, here's an idolize me, like, tell me how great I am.
Well, one of the things, and if you want to circle back, I could tell you a little bit about my own behavior that I could see in that. But I think from the way Melissa has explained it to all of her clients, and we've talked about it, is that from the gumball person standpoint, the one who's seeking, the attention, they have really no clue what they're doing. At the end of the day, they're it's kind of like an addiction, a sickness. They are seeking validation for themselves, and they have developed these coping mechanisms throughout their life to deal with whatever previous traumas that they may have had. And this is just kind of how it manifests itself now. And that's why Melissa was saying that they're on a spectrum, right? Like, how severe is this, and how introspective is this person even capable of looking at these behaviors and saying, I really need to do some deep work on myself and understand why it is that I'm always having to be the one that's trying to triangulate and getting multiple people to compete for me, and I have to have a woman here and a woman there, or doing that, playing favorites amongst family members or whatever it may be. So Melissa's kind of said not to use the pity here, but like, we need to have pity for the gumball people, not pity, but like an understanding that it is kind of a coping mechanism gone wrong to an extreme. And it's just kind of human behavior, unfortunately.
And I imagine my hypothesis here is that we all have our favorite flavor of gumball, that even if we're on a sugar detox, we would still gravitate to one or two of these flavors, even with some self-awareness, even with working on ourselves. Like, I think we're human, right? So I'm sure at some point we all drop into that gumball behavior. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, but I think that we can, let's say, you're proud of yourself and you kind of talked about an achievement a little too much or whatever, but that's a functional level of attention where it's like, oh yeah, that feels good. Or it feels good to have an Instagram like, or a post that really resonated with people. Those things feel good. And yes, you'll get a dopamine rush from that. But the difference is, am I relying on that? Is that where I am getting all of my validation? And it really is just like addiction. Is it affecting your life? Are you able to give to others? Are you listening to others? Are you able to be a friend? Because that is the differentiator. I think someone else mentioned the Gottman Institute, which was my therapist told me about Gottman, and that was like the leveling of all of the advice out there. It was like, I literally threw all the dating advice books out, and the Gottman Institute became the gold standard.
The Bible.
Yes, because friendship is at the core. And that's the one thing that the gumball person really struggles with, is actual true friendship. They could be a friend sometimes, they have good moments. And this is where you can say, okay, this person's idolized me. They need a lot of attention. They're not a terrible person, but I really can't count on them to be the listener. So it's not the person you bring great news to and hope that they're going to be there for you. So that's what I would say, if you don't remember anything else, is that if I'm seeking attention too much, I'm really lacking in my ability to be a true friend. And that's what makes them not able to be a good partner in a relationship, because they don't bring the friendship component. So you end up being the person that's always trying to provide, okay, what sugar, what flavor do you want today? Do you need pity? Do you need to be entertained? Oh, now you need to fight, or now there's some other person that I have to compete with, or you're like just flirting with the waitress because, you like her giving you the attention. Like some of these guys,
you might want to fight.
Well, yeah. And I think the last two, one of them, you actually had mentioned, Sammy, a little bit earlier, in kind of described the behavior.
Keeping on the hook. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was chase me, and I'll let you kind of,
Yeah. So
you were talking about me, like, oh, you were sending her, sending out the fishing hook and seeing if she'd respond. And
so that the pink gumball, I was like, okay, pink has to represent like all these other women. So that's the chase me. And that is probably the most popular guy online that drives every girl crazy, because he's the guy that reaches out, but then doesn't make plans. And just like you said, one of my friends says they do just enough to keep you reeled in, but not enough to contribute to your life. They're making zero contribution to your life, but they're there and they're hot, and you're like, oh my gosh, we had that great date or that hot makeout, or it's like, what's going on? I mean, it was like what I was thinking with Iain, like, so when we were fizzling out, it was like, he wanted to be, I could tell he wanted, but there was like, he couldn't follow through. And so I was just like, what is going on? So, and he wasn't really wanting me to chase him, but that's what these guys do, where you feel like, should I send him a text, or should I be the one that sends the text? Because you're getting those mixed signals because you heard from him, and then now it's been like 3 days, and then you give up, and then he texts you again.
Like a month later, like, hey, how was your weekend?
Yeah,
and you're like, dude, we were supposed to meet like last month. What the fuck?
The visual for me is like, the sporting ground, and the coach is there, and they've got their players on the field, and then they've just got a couple that they keep on the bench, not guaranteeing they're ever going to get any game time, but they chuck out the attaboy like every now and then to keep them on the bench. Like, because I might want you maybe one day to play in the main game, but for now, just, I want to make sure that you stay on that bench for me. Like, I love this language. So the chase me gumball. So I think that's 7. What's our
7?
What's our 8?
The 8th one is the convince me person.
I despise this person. But
this is the person, like, I have a
superiority complex guy or girl or person.
Yeah. This is the person that comes into, it's a lot of different things, but they do have a sense of superiority, where you get this feeling like on dates where they can be the person that I have a lot of walls up, convince me you're not like anybody else. I feel like all women are the same. And then you're like, I've been in debates with these guys where like, I just feel like all women are the same. Or is love really real? Do you really think it really works for anybody? And then I'd be like, of course it works. And blah, 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 blah. And I would just be, the little cheerleader and trying to sell them and convince them. Or in the relationship, they just have a lot of walls up because they've been really hurt. It's like, who hasn't? But they decide that they're the ones that have been the most hurt. And now you have to be convincing them. So a lot of times I have a client right now where all of the blame is always on her. Everything's her fault. And she's constantly defending herself. But I did this and I did that. And it's like, that's never enough. You don't prioritize me. You don't, I don't feel like that you really show me that you value me. And so you're just working overtime to prove. So this is like prove you're worthy, or prove yourself is what you feel like you have to do with a convince me. So if you can think about that, like, what if you have a convince me, fight me, pity me?
That's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, I bet these convince me people are then fight me people. Like,
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Because
pity, like you said.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they're getting high off of it. This is what they like. This is what they've confused with what love is. So we're people that are actually connection people that want love and they want the whole thing. We're in these conversations and we don't realize we're speaking completely different languages. You can feed gumballs to people forever and they will never be your friend, and they will never put the ring on your finger. They'll never marry you, because that is where they're comfortable, is always receiving that attention. So it can be validation, it can be numbing. I have my list here. It can validate, stimulate, soothe, numb, distract. So if you think about attention, can supply any number of things, like a drug. So what's the drug? Why do they need it? So when you think about these people, like, okay, so if fight me is coming through, like, what is this person about? Why are they trying to fight all the time? What's that about? Because then you start really seeing them for who they are, and you stop blaming yourself, which is the biggest differentiator. When you can see the patterns and be able to predict them, then you start to see, okay, wait, maybe I'm not really the cause of all of this. Because often they'll have you convinced that you are the problem. And we all have our part for sure. But I would be endlessly giving gumballs to guys and not realizing that this wasn't even, they weren't caring for me. They weren't caring about my life, my friends, my family, my work, anything that was important. I mean, now that being with Iain and having like such a loving, committed relationship where it's like such a solid partner and friendship. I mean, that's really, I guess we should have said that. That's what we built in 2020 was a true friendship. And so that just gave us such a rock solid foundation. So yeah, I could go on and on, but those are the 8 flavors, and it could be books in and of themselves.
Yeah. So Melissa, this framework is amazing. And I've had so many light bulbs go off during this conversation in this framework. So just to recap, so we have red, arouse me, orange, fight me, yellow, entertain me, green, compete for me, blue, pity me, purple, idolize me, pink, chase me, and white, convince me.
You got it.
Amazing. So there was a snapshot there that you said that when people are like putting in a quarter and seeking one of these gumballs, or maybe a couple of different flavors of these gumballs, they're looking for attention. And you mentioned a couple of things about why they might be seeking that attention. Can you recap those for us?
Sure. So there's a lot of research, but there's very limited research around attention seeking itself. There's a lot of research around attachment, and we talked a little bit about that, where you have secure attachment, ambivalent attachment, anxious attachment, all of those things. But almost always, in fact, I've never seen this happen where it doesn't come from a childhood trauma where you were not getting the appropriate attention from your mom or dad or both, or there was a traumatic experience. Or in some cases, I've had clients that say, Melissa, I had a great childhood, so I don't fit into that mold. But then I'll say, but what was your first love relationship like? And often it can be, maybe they were a girl that didn't get a lot of attention from guys. And that first guy that gave them attention was a giant gumball guy that gave them this amazing romantic experience, but then broke her heart, cheated on her, or took her through a very dramatic or abusive relationship where it went on for a period of time. So it just depends. Everybody knows. You can kind of search your heart and say, and a lot of times too, we get caught up with a partner because we know that past and we know that history. We know that this is what would happen to me. I would see, oh, I know what happened with your mom. I know what happened with your dad. And that would make me have so much compassion that I would hang in there, because I would think, I'm being here for you. You need a friend, you need a partner, you need love. And I could see that they weren't receiving love the way they should. But I felt like if I just love you enough, that eventually you'll be okay. And I didn't understand what was going on, that this had to be healed, that there's trauma that's happened, but it's usually in that child development where they didn't get enough attention. Or like an idolize me person is often someone who had a lot of attention. They were the it person. They were the star quarterback, and now they're not. And all of a sudden they need to be idolized because they're feeling that need for validation, but it's all external validation. So if I'm seeking the gumball, the dopamine rush, the sugar high, it's because I cannot validate myself and I need others to do it for me. And so the flavor of attention that you need, it just depends on the trauma that you had and how that develops. So there's so many nuances to it, but that would be, if you think of it as, I always thought of it this way too. It could be, I'm stimulating them, or I'm soothing them, or I'm numbing them, or this is what they need. I want to be stimulated, soothed, numbed, or distracted in some way. So when you think about the flavors, and you think about which one, like pity me is very soothing, but then fight me is very stimulating. So it acts as the drug a lot of times, and it feeds one of the other typically.
So Iain, you mentioned earlier that once you had been introduced to this framework, you were able to see some of these behaviors or patterns of behavior in yourself. Which I applaud you for that self-awareness and the honesty, because I'm sure we all have these behaviors. And I think you kind of nailed it, Melissa, where you talked about there being resourceful ways to get a need met and unresourceful ways to get a need met. And it's not to say that you shouldn't ever share the things that you're proud of, like in that idolize me example. And then that tipping point of it being a resourceful, connection deepening conversational behavior versus a unresourceful attempt to get more gumballs. So I really, really like this. And I just want to say thank you so much for spending what is obviously hours and hours and hours pouring through ideas and thoughts and frameworks and suggestions to sort of arrive at this place where it's a tool that people can use. So if someone's listening to this and they've maybe identified in their own behavior or maybe in their partner's behavior. What's the next step? What do we do once we've gone, oh yeah, I am a bit of a yellow, or I am a bit of a green, or I am a bit of a purple, or my partner is one of those things? What do we now do with that information?
So first, I always say just observe the behavior, because often when people first hear this, they think, oh my gosh, I can just diagnose everyone. And some people want to just tell their partner, but I think you need to get yourself familiar with the content and observe it and see if you can observe it. And I always say observe and preserve. So don't try to point this out to your partner or to your family member or whatever and say, oh my gosh, you're an idolizing me person, because they often won't understand you. It's like literally diagnosing their main core issue, and they're never going to resolve that unless they have awareness and they go to therapy, they do the work. So it's more for you, as if you see it in yourself. What you would do next is you can reach out to me to do a 30-minute free coaching call. You can go to gumballlove.com and take the assessment and see, okay, if I'm seeing these patterns, how severe are they? Not only will you be able to see which flavors of attention are coming up, but also the number of red flags. So you'll get a red flag report. And we'll be able to give you some guidance to say, okay, everybody might have some tendencies, but you'll be able to see when those percentages reach a point where a relationship with a person like that might not be manageable. So I would say take the assessment, observe the behavior, relax, take a deep breath. It's not the end of the world. And also that's what I do is I coach my clients through this process. If they have a partner or they're single and they don't want to meet another partner like that. What do you think?
Podcast and Facebook.
Oh, yes. And so I also have a podcast. So many episodes about the flavors and just learning more about the content and getting familiar. And then we have a free private Facebook group as well. So you can join the community and have conversations with like-minded people that are also dealing with this revelation for the first time, because it's really an eye-opener and it's a process when you kind of awaken to knowing this, but it's so liberating, because I think as a person who really struggled with boundaries, this really helps you see what people you need to keep where, and you understand why those boundaries need to be set. So
I'm curious, do you use this language in your own relationship? Like, do you call each other out on this type of behavior because you've both got a good depth of understanding of the framework and you share that language?
Yeah. Once in a while, he'll say what flavor do you think you are? And I think for me, I can be a little bit convince me, especially in the beginning, just because I was scared, right? So you can check yourself and say, okay, you've been through a lot in relationships, but you can't expect this guy to constantly be proving that he's a good guy, because he is proving that every day. So I caught myself being a little bit convince me. If you are functional and you're in a healthy relationship, you're not going to see this in a healthy relationship very often. And that's what I discovered with healthy marriages. And I started looking at real healthy couples. Either one of them, they're not attention seekers. And so they have a natural ability to build secure connection. So in some of them, they may have had to do a lot of work in therapy to get there. Others just grew up with a healthy, secure attachment from birth. And, there's some lucky people out there that have that. Most of us don't. So yeah, in a functioning, healthy relationship, this is probably not going to be an issue, but we all have these people in our lives, and they can have titles like mom or dad or sister. We don't know what's going on. And so it's like, why is this person not listening to me? Why are they trying to talk over me in meetings? What's going on? You can really see what's motivating them. And it gives you a bird's eye view. I don't know what I would do without it. I use it all the time. And sometimes you're sitting there, you're like, oh, wait, you'll be frustrated. And then it clicks and you're like, oh, there it is. Okay. There's the pity me. That's what they are. That's what they're driving. And it's a disappointing sometimes, because you're like, wow, I really had higher expectations, but now that I see it, I can't unsee it. And so, but you're able to adjust your expectations accordingly. And so it's liberating.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, so we've talked a lot about the origin story of your relationship, the Gumball framework, which I love. But what I would love to know is, what are the two of you doing now in your relationship to keep it fueled up? Have you got any daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually practices or habits that you exercise or you practice to keep your relationship fueled up in this beautiful state?
Yeah. So, I mean, we both have very similar love languages, touch and quality time. So I never have to try to get quality time with Iain. We work from home, so we're together a lot, and that's tested if we will get sick of each other, which we don't. So knock on wood. We have separate offices, so we have coffee in the morning and then we separate and do our work through the day. But we always come together and make dinner together, have dinner every night. And then Iain always makes us a cup of tea at bedtime. Then we sit in bed and talk over tea. And then we have usually our favorite show that we're watching. That we pick, and we'll watch a show before bed. So it's kind of like our regular routine.
Yeah. And I think often we think that relationships is about the big things and that there's big moments of trauma or crisis or mistakes or fuck ups. But I think on the flip side, the positive fuel that you put into your relationship is made up of those tiny rituals, those having a cup of tea together in an evening, cooking dinner together, having the lunchtime cuddle, like these small moments of adding fuel back into your relationship. And I don't think we should ever underestimate that. So thank you so much for sharing those few things.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Thank you both so much for joining. So to say thank you so much for joining us today, Iain and Melissa, we've given access to a school uniform for a month to a student in Cambodia. What's really great about this project is that schooling is soft and free in Cambodia, but the family needs to pay for the uniform to grant that access. So with this uniform comes education. So thank you so much for being here and making that possible.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's great. That's a wonderful cause.
So Iain and Melissa, if people want to connect with you or learn a little bit more about the Gumball theory, how can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go to our website, gumballove.com. Don't forget there's 3 L's, Gumball, and then an extra L for love. So gumballove.com. And I am now Melissa Jane Roberts on Instagram.
Amazing.
So that's MELISSAJANE and Roberts. So that's the best way to reach me. DM me, and you can also set up a free coaching call. If you'd like, the link is in my bio on Instagram.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks so much for this conversation. It's been amazing.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks heaps for joining us. If you love what we're doing here and want more, subscribe to the Date Forever podcast to make sure you never miss an ep. Come and hang out with us and other awesome couples who are fueling up their relationships in the Thriving Couples Collective Facebook group, or check us out at fuelcollective.com.au. Until next time, keep on dating, because better relationships equal a better world.